Welcome to the show. My name is Jesse Coomer, and I am a breathworker and a health and wellness educator. And you know what? This is dedicated to hopefully bringing some relaxation, some chill into your life. We're going to talk about things that I find to be interesting and that I hope that you find to be interesting as well. If there's any topic that you'd like me to discuss, please go ahead, reach out to me in the show notes you're going to see below. There is my email, it's jessecoomer.com, or you can just make a comment and I would be happy to maybe discuss some of those topics in the future. Today we're going to be talking about the death of freedom. Now that might sound incredibly heavy, but I've got a take on it that I'd like to share with you. We're also going to be talking a little bit about kava. Kava is a Polynesian drink that I have grown to love. I've been using kava now since, I think 30 years. So it's something that I find to be very enjoyable. It's something that I can use cautiously and with care. It's not something you would just down a whole bunch of kava and go driving and things, but it's not something that you're going to be impaired either. It's an herb that I've been using for a long time, and I've developed a taste for it. Now, having said that, it may not be the tastiest herb on the market. It may not be something that you yourself might use because you love the flavor. Normally a person, their first coffee, they have to put a lot of creamer, sugar, and flavorings in it. And then eventually, if you're like me, I prefer drinking coffee just black. And I like the bitter flavor. But you start off a lot of these things not because they taste so good, but because they have a pleasant effect. And that is where I like kava. Now, a lot of people ask me why I don't use kratom. I've heard of kratom, but I don't really have any desire to do that. And this is because, I don't know if you know this about me or not. We're gonna get to know each other a lot on these episodes, but I am a former opioid addict. So yeah, so this is something that I've read that kratom has a similar effect, and I don't ever want to do anything that might cause me to have a relapse or a desire to relapse or even thinking about relapsing. I have been free, and this is coming back to that freedom thing we're going to talk about today, but I have been free of my addiction for, 13 years with zero relapses ever, and I never want to have an inkling, not even a little bit of that ever to come back. We'll talk more about addiction and recovery from addiction in other episodes. If you are personally recovering from an addiction, if this is something that you're struggling with, I do have an online course that is called Recovery Breath. It's one of those courses where you can just pay whatever you want. So you can just make a donation, you can pay I have a suggested amount there, or you can just have it for free. It's just some fundamentals of our nervous system, how breathing interfaces with those things, and how the unconscious and the conscious work together, or how they fight with each other. But anyway, we'll talk about some of that maybe on another episode. But today we're going to be talking about freedom, or maybe the death of our own freedom. And so before we do that though, I think I'll take a little bit of kava. Kava has a kind of a sedative effect. It's not an incredibly strong sedative effect, but if you use it late at night, it can help you have a better night's sleep. If you use it during the day, it's not like it's going to just make you pass out, but it's a relaxing type of a thing. And this is a relaxing kind of show that I want to produce here. So we're just going to have a nice relaxing thing. Each time we do one of these episodes, I'm going to try something new. If there's something you'd like me to try other than kratom, I'd be happy to try those things as well. So what I have here, this is a company called Breathwork. So it's a company called Breathwork. I'll link that in the description box in the show notes. We also have a coupon code through Breathwork. So if you choose to purchase Breathwork, a little bit of that goes back to the show. And I have been using these guys now for about a year, and I'm really kind of they spoil you, because a lot of kava you have to use in the traditional way, and that is you kind of put the raw kava root in a strainer, and you really have to wring it out, and you have to work with it, and you have to knead it. It kind of turns into kind of a doughy type of material. And while you get, I would say, just as with anything, you're going to get the best overall result. You're going to get the best product. You're going to get the best end result whenever you do it the traditional way. I am a big fan of the ease that these guys have done. Basically, they dehydrated it. They did the traditional method, and then they just took the water out, and then you just add the water back, and you get the same flavor, you get the same effect. Now you'll notice with kava, I mean, we're talking about, this is, I mean, it's kind of a gross looking drink, to be honest. And the thing is, if you're like me, you're used to it. I'm used to it. It's hey, that's great, awesome, it's kava. You'll have some people who will really never like it. And I know I've gotten some of my friends to try this. I'm like, hey, yeah, try it. Yeah, the taste isn't all that great, but you know, it's got a nice effect. I actually like the taste now. I've developed a taste for it, but a lot of my friends have not. Cheers, my friends. If you've got a beverage of your choice, my salute to you. So I'm gonna enjoy this as I discuss with you something I've been wanting to share, and just kind of, a lot of these episodes are ultimately just me going through my own internal thoughts, going through my own thinking on subjects that I think that the average person is probably interested in, but we don't often talk about. And that when we talk about freedom, a lot of times we talk about how we're boxed in, how there are outside forces that are causing us not to feel free, how we're losing freedoms every day. I hear a lot of this. I live in the Midwest, and so I get a wide variety of different perspectives that people throw at me from around the country, but also I hear a lot about it just every day with my friends, my family here in the Midwest. And what happens so often when we have this discussion about freedom, I do think about, okay, there are issues, there are outside forces, but my thoughts always come back to Jean-Paul Sartre. And I know I mispronounced his last name. I'm an American. Sartre, maybe that's how it's pronounced. You can put it in the comments if I'm mispronouncing it. But Jean-Paul Sartre was a French philosopher who was an incredibly prolific author. I forget how many pages he supposedly typed up per day, but we're talking about a person who I believe it was like 10 to 20 pages that he produced daily of some of the philosophy that affected all of philosophy ever since then. So he was a 20th century philosopher, especially mid 20th century, in the school of existentialism. Sartre would use an analogy of how we often lie to ourselves and how we often ultimately deceive ourselves in believing that we're not as free as we actually are. And so he used the example of a waiter. So in this example, he had this waiter who believed, I will never be anything other than a waiter. There's nothing I can do. I don't really want to be a waiter, but I need the money. I don't have any other way of making money. And so a waiter is what I am. It's just what I am. And what Sartre points out is that ultimately we do this all the time. This waiter could quit being a waiter at any time. This is not an enslaved person. This is ultimately a person who is choosing to go through the motions out of the desire for safety. And this is something that later on in neuroscience, we've learned about the unconscious, ultimately unconscious processes that affect us and that influence our decisions and influence the way we see the world. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman, he discusses in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, the concept of all we see is all there is, or what we see is all there is, I think is how he puts it. And ultimately what that means is that we use what we know and we form a picture, and it's very unlikely that we're going to look outside of our initial concept or our initial understanding of the situation. The unconscious is incredibly powerful. Kahneman calls it System 1. He calls our unconscious System 1 and our conscious thinking self System 2. And he says, and ultimately what happens is System 1, it makes incredibly powerful decisions. It does an enormous amount of processing, and then that ultimately, for most of us, becomes our worldview. It shapes what we believe about our situation, and it's very unlikely that we're going to go much beyond that particular view. And for instance, he gives an example in his book that if you're looking for a leader, think about what you want in a leader. Okay, great. So you have that in mind. So here is John. John is strong. John is intelligent. John is well educated, and John is clear orator in his speaking. And so automatically the unconscious part of you says, okay, this seems probably like a person who's going to be a good leader. These are all attributes that you might consider to be powerful leadership attributes. But what Kahneman points out is that we have that information and we've formed a complete opinion without knowing anything about, is this person honest? Is this person just? Is this person someone who has, terrible skeletons in his closet? And we do that to ourselves. We do that when we look at our lives. We say, okay, these are the things that I know about, and we're often unwilling to do the work to find out what we don't already know. So in the case of Sartre's waiter, that person is saying, okay, this is the life that I already know. This is how I feel within that context. And I'm not really willing to do the research to look outside of that. And in doing so, we enslave ourselves. We remove freedom from ourselves, as Sartre would say, in order to help us to feel safe. We want to not have to really think too hard. Kahneman talks about how it's unlikely that System 2, or our conscious problem-solving mind, will say, okay, well, you know what? I don't like the situation that I'm in. Let's do a bunch of research to find out how to get out of this situation. Because it's difficult. And conscious reasoning and critical thought is difficult to do. Critical thinking takes a lot more calories. It takes time. It's slower than unconscious thinking. Unconscious thinking is almost instantaneously happening. That's why we jump to conclusions. But it takes a long time to critically think. So I want to start this conversation. This is something we'll talk about as we keep going through these sessions and these episodes. But as we look at our own personal freedom, how much of our belief about I am not free comes from an unwillingness to examine the possibilities of freedom? For most of us, our freedom is being infringed on by our unwillingness to examine our potential options, maybe our eagerness, maybe unconscious eagerness to say the way things are, it's out of my control. I have to keep doing this thing over and over again. There are no options for me, and I am stuck. I am a slave in the system, and there's no way out. I think we occasionally see people who break out of that system, and we love to make excuses. Well, that person had this advantage, this thing happened, it was luck, or all these other things. And for some reason, we can never see our own advantages. We can never see our own possibilities. So I want to just challenge you today. And I'd love to get your perspective on this. I'd love this to be a dialogue. I would love to make more sessions just like this one where we discuss these things And I would love for you to bring up those things to me. So if you have comments or thoughts, this is a cheers to you, salute. But I want to close this out by just simply encouraging you to see the freedom that you have. All right, my friends, I hope you had a fun time, and I hope you enjoyed this opportunity to maybe slow down, to relax a little bit, maybe just to think about our own freedom. So guys, thanks so much for being here. Please like, subscribe. Let me know what you think about this new format. Let me know what you think about freedom. Give me your opinions. And I would love for this to be an opportunity for us to dialogue. Feel free to reach out to me at jessecoomer.com, sign up for my newsletter. And don't forget to go out there and be kind to one another. That includes being kind to yourself.